Hey, everybody. Thanks so much for being here today for another EstateSales.NET industry chat. I've got a really special guest for you guys today. Joining me today is Virginia Chamlee. She's an artist. She is a staff writer for People magazine, and she's also the best-selling author of Big Thrift Energy. Virginia, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited. EstateSales.NET is probably my most used website other than Google.
Perfect. We love to hear that. So, actually just finished the book the other day, and it's an incredible read, especially for the industry that we're in. One of the things I wanted to start out with was, what was your biggest inspiration for writing the book?
Yeah, so I grew up going to thrift stores and estate sales and live auctions and all of that good stuff with my grandmother. My grandmother raised me as a single mom, and I was an only child, so we were very, very close. And she was so great at thrifting. She had a real knack for finding really unique things, valuable things out of Architectural Digest, and she
Right.
knew exactly what to do with them when she brought them home. And I guess she sort of passed that on to me. So as I got older and I started decorating my first apartment and later bought my first home and decorated that, I would always share on Instagram, the pieces I found at thrift stores and estate sales. And I was always getting questions from people like, how do you know about these things? How did you find this? How did you know that that's good or valuable or worth buying? And I just felt like, some of it might be luck, but I really think there's kind of a formula for finding these amazing pieces and sort of what to do with them when you bring them home. And that sort of was the genesis of the book, really.
Awesome. Yeah, it's I was asked on a podcast recently about, why I kind of got into it, and it was a grandparents thing,
Yeah.
doing the trade fairs with my grandfather and all that stuff. So, one of the things that I picked out about the book is obviously, once our folks read it, and they're going to realize there's a couple different facets to the book, how to style, how to sell the stuff you find, but it really does serve as sort of a beginner's guide to people that may be new into thrifting and want to get into it. What are some of the biggest pieces of advice that you can give those people that are just now starting to get their feet wet, in the thrifting business?
So I think if you've never been to a thrift store or you're really, really new at vintage shopping, it can be incredibly overwhelming.
Sure.
A lot of times estate sales are a little bit different because obviously you're going in someone's home and it's been sort of styled and it's easier to shop. Thrift stores are not like that generally.
Right.
Obviously there are some that are a little bit more merchandised and styled up, but most of them, they have so much merchandise that they just can't really keep up. So to find things, you really have to hunt, and you have to be able to sort of creatively think of how this might look in my home or in the space that I want to style it, rather than just in a pile or sitting, against the wall or something,
Right.
as things often are displayed in thrift stores. So I think my biggest pieces of advice are to sort of have a general idea before you even leave your house and go to a thrift store. Maybe not like a grocery list, because you're not going to find exactly everything you want,
Yeah.
but a general idea of like what your style is, what materials you like. That way you don't either get so overwhelmed you buy nothing, or you get so overwhelmed you kind of buy everything, and then you get home and it's like, why did I buy all of this stuff? I now have to take it back to Goodwill or wherever.
Right. So, yeah. So one of the things you mentioned was, kind of defining your own style, before you set out for those adventures. Cause like you said, you can end up coming up with a whole truck full of stuff that you don't really need or didn't know that you didn't want. So, alongside the advice that you give new thrifters, as far as, some of the, cause I'm sure you face them as well, some of the pitfalls that new thrifters fall into, what are some of those that you see out there, and how can you kind of avoid those?
I think one of the biggest pitfalls is when you go to a thrift store, generally things are priced very low, right? It's very affordable. That's kind of the draw of shopping at a thrift store, that and the charity aspect, of course. But sometimes you can find things that are maybe a little bit off kilter. Maybe it's a ceramic that's chipped, or it's a chair that's missing a leg or an arm, but it's so inexpensive that you think, well, I'm just going to buy this and it'll be a project piece.
Right.
And you will almost never fix those things in my experience. I have bought, I think, especially at the beginning and when I was first buying things for my own home, it was like, oh, well, these things are so cheap that I almost have to buy it, but you really don't. And so I think, buying things that are either not your style and you're buying it just because maybe you saw someone else on Instagram had it, but then you get it home and it doesn't really fit in your space, or you're buying something that's damaged beyond repair, or it's repairable, but maybe you don't really have the skill set to fix it. I think
Gotcha.
those are the biggest things to avoid.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing, you and I kind of talked last night, I don't want to spoil the book. I don't want to go into great detail about what's in there, because we want to give everyone a chance to read it. But one of the things that you did touch on was not necessarily following the trends that are out there. Especially I could see that could be something that new thrifters, they read blogs or they read magazines and this stuff's in style, then they go hunt for that and they kind of pigeonhole themselves. So staying away from following trends, but there are some things out there that are obviously never going to go out of style and should always be picked up. What are some of those in your opinion?
I think some of the sort of classics all boil down to material, right? So like marble is such an incredible material that we've seen really throughout the ages. I mean, marble is kind of an ancient material, but it's a piece that will always be very valuable and generally always kind of be in style and can sort of work with numerous trends, no matter what your aesthetic is. Similarly, lucite, I think we saw lucite really kind of explode over the past like 10 to 15 years when Hollywood Regency and mid-century kind of came back in vogue. But really lucite, because it's clear and it matches everything, that can work in so many different spaces. I also think, one of the great things to look for at the thrift store or at an estate sale is upholstered furniture. If it's a great shape, that's something that you can literally have forever. You can just get it reupholstered or try to reupholster it yourself, to coincide with whatever trend you're into at that moment.
Okay. And this is something that I ran into as I was reading your book. I would stop and I would just kind of look around the space that I was in at the time. And, my home isn't decorated with a lot of thrifted stuff, but I was wondering if there was any advice that you have for people that are wanting to redesign an already lived in space that may just have, regular, I'll say regular, just, not thrifted items. What are some of the pieces of advice you could give them to just kind of freshen up their space a little bit?
I think one of the greatest ways to freshen up your space is with accessories and sort of layering pieces. So if you already have the basics like a couch and a table and chairs and all of that, adding, whether it's one big, bold, amazing piece of art, or maybe it's several and you create a gallery wall over time. That's kind of the fun to me of designing a space, is letting it evolve and not doing it all in one go, but sort of every time you go to an estate sale or every time you go thrifting, or maybe you go to a flea market or something, you're sort of collecting those pieces and like layering over time. And that's sort of where the personality comes through. So I think accessories, I love boxes because they're very, very useful and they can add a lot of like color, and you can find really interesting ones made of all different materials.
Yeah.
Books, vintage books are a really great way to sort of add personality and punch to your home. And you can obviously style them on a coffee table or a bookcase, or you can like stack them on an end table. So I think really accessories is a great way to sort of add personality.
Okay. Yeah. And again, one of the things I picked out when I was reading was the no man left behind rule, which I could really connect with, because although we're in an area that unfortunately doesn't have a lot of estate sales, there's always that one thing that I wish, I wish I would have picked it up as soon as I walked through the door, because I knew I wanted it, and not having to rely on it being there the last day of the sale. Can you kind of give us an example? I know you've probably gone through that yourself where you wouldn't have written about it. What are some things that maybe that you had left behind and that you wish you would have picked up?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, this happens to me a lot. I always say we always regret the things we don't buy, which is very true. So there was an estate sale probably 2 years ago, and it was an artist's home, and it was so incredible because it was this beautiful home on the river, but then she had her studio in like a separate space outside of the house. It was almost like its own little mini home, and it was full of incredible art. I mean, she had been an artist for like 50 years. She was very prolific. So she had tons and tons of stuff. Everything was like $1 or something crazy.
Right.
I bought a lot, but I definitely regret many pieces that I did not get that day. Another of the pieces that haunts me, strangely, it actually wasn't from a thrift store, but years and years ago, this was probably 20 years ago. It was probably 20 years ago. My grandmother and I were at a Home Goods. And this is back when like you used to be able to find some incredible stuff at Home Goods, designer stuff. And they had a Pierre Cardin side table that was like postmodern and angular. I don't even know where this thing came from.
Right.
but it was lime green. It was the coolest table. It's probably worth like $2,500 now if I were to, own it and resell it. And we passed on it. I don't know why. And I think we saw it like 3 different times. And then finally we went back for it. And of course it was gone.
Yeah.
And I think about it all the time now, all these years later. So
it's funny.
yeah. But the good thing about thrifting and vintage shopping is you always find unique stuff. So if you do pass on something, you'll probably find some like cool version of it later.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we've put out, tips and tricks videos for shopping estate sales. And, one of the main things that get brought up is, and you mentioned it too, is, last day of the sale, you're going to find the great deals because these people are trying to get rid of, they're trying to move on to the next house and all that. But, here's to your point, if you see something when you walk through the door, pick it up because you don't know if it's still going to be there. So
it's so true.
And that kind of leads into my next question. Living a minimalist lifestyle is kind of a buzzword that we've heard for the past several years. But something that's really been popping up, especially on our Instagram, is maximalism. Which, I mean, if you're a wordsmith, that kind of means the opposite of minimalist. Right. So kind of describe what that is and, how you kind of apply it to your design and your process of thrifting.
To me, maximalism is all about sort of mixing and matching, mixing textures and colors, but also eras. I mean, I think one thing we see a lot with minimalism is it's not just about a really minimal color palette, but it tends to be very restrictive in terms of the design style we see in a room. Right. A lot of minimalist spaces are really, really modern and angular lines and things like that. I love all of it. I really don't have a favorite era or a favorite color or favorite style. So to me, it's all about the mix and sort of layering. And I call it having a conversation. Like I like everything in my room, even if it's not matchy, I like it to look like it's having a really nice intellectual conversation, right? If there's a angular piece, it's fun if it's offset by a more round or curved piece, things like that. So, I think part of the reason we always see pendulums swing, right? So we've seen minimalism, and I call it 50 Shades of Beige. I feel like it's all over Instagram. Like all of the influencers have like a very similar look. And I get it. If that's what you like and that resonates with you, by all means, that should be your thing. But at a certain point, it all sort of starts to blend together. And I think the fun thing about maximalism is you can really sort of show your personality that way. And you can, layer and add to it as you go. So your home almost becomes like your scrapbook, of pieces you find on your travels and estate sales and new stuff and old stuff. And sort of all of it can commingle and exist together.
So one of the things is, people could walk into your house and kind of tell who you are without even needing to talk to you. I mean, your space
it's kind of like how you dress, right? Like, people who dress a certain way, you sort of can see someone and first impression know a little bit about them. Right. I think the same can be said for a lot of people's homes and certainly hopefully for mine.
So what do the big live, laugh, love signs say about people? You have to talk about that. So, when it comes to thrifting and going to estate sales, you mentioned the little old ladies that are out there every weekend. They're up before the dawn and ready to hit those sales. Kind of walk me through, Virginia's perfect day of thrifting. Like, what time do you start? What do you take with you? Like, walk me through, give me sort of a day in the life of your thrifting day.
Okay. So my perfect day would really start before I even leave the house. And I talk about this a lot in the book, but I just think it's so fun and important to get inspiration before you leave. That way, again, it's important not to have like a perfect grocery list, right? Of like eggs, milk, cheese, but just a general idea. So I love to go on Pinterest and Instagram and sort of look at different rooms and designers who inspire me. And that way I have an idea when I go out, like different colors I'm looking for, or maybe just, I really should look for a side table today or something that could function as a side table. So I love to get inspiration first. And then my little bag, I mean, I always have a tape measure. I have a tape measure attached to my keys. So, that's an important thing to have, both to determine if something would fit in your home and also in your car. I have an SUV, but that's a problem I've run into before. Like if part is too wide, I need to know if I need to get a U-Haul. And I'll get my coffee, and then I will, if I'm going to estate sales, I'll start at estate sales because I like to do those in the morning. Especially obviously if it's the first day. I mean, you kind of have to go
Yeah.
early if you want to be the first
Yeah.
in line. You might, I mean, I've had days where I've started at like 4 or earlier. And then I'll go to as many estate sales and thrift stores as I can. I try to keep it in one general area. So I'm in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, which is right outside of Jacksonville. And there are certain Jacksonville is huge. It's very spread out. So I can't hit up every thrift store in town as much as I'd like to, but I'll hit like one neighborhood and try to go to like every thrift store, because that's really the key, right? Is people tell me all the time, like, oh, you're so lucky. You find all these cool things. You must be going to some really great, really like one single great thrift store.
Right.
But the truth is I go to as many as I can. Yeah. Like, I wish I could tell people there is a secret thrift store where everything is amazing. But the truth is, it's like for every 10 I go to, maybe I get 5 good things. And maybe I go to one and I get 10 amazing things in one. So, yeah, but I would say, like, on a perfect day of thrifting, I get really in the zone, and it's hard for me to sometimes remember to even like eat, which makes me not a fun person to go thrifting with. A lot of friends are like, I want to go thrifting with you. And then they go and they're like, this sucks.
A hangry thrifter is not a fun thrifter, huh?
Right.
Right. One of the things that you mentioned too is, developing relationships, whether it be with the estate sale company owners or the thrift store owners, or maybe even down to who runs each individual booth. Because a lot of the times they'll give you the heads if they know you're spending money, they'll give you the heads up on the good stuff. So, I'm going to throw something at you that we didn't really talk about, and it's a question that comes up sometimes from an interior design standpoint. What advice do you have for scaling furniture for a room? I know not everybody knows the dimensions of their living room and know how to, hey, I see this couch, I want it to fit. Like, what are some tips you have for that?
I mean, obviously, I think you should have a general idea, but I also don't, you don't want to buy a couch that's like twice the width of your actual room, because it won't fit. But for instance, I am currently sitting in my dining area on a bench that's like the length of really a bed, and I use it at my dining room table. So that's probably not necessarily adhering to any design rules, but I've almost made like a makeshift banquette, I guess. So I have a round table and then this like really wide bench behind it. So I think one thing is, it's really important not to necessarily restrict yourself, and always think creatively and outside the box. I mean, I think there are some design rules that are important and make sense, like hanging your curtains really high up makes the room look bigger, even if your windows aren't very big. I think something like that's important. But in terms of like, oh, your bedside tables need to be lower than the bed, I don't necessarily think that's true. I think a lot of it is intuitive.
Right.
And if you look at something and you're like, oh, I really, really love this, I think you can find a way to sort of make it work.
Right.
As long as the dimensions aren't, totally
common
off.
sense and a little design style. I mean, or design sense will go a long way. And again, I was reading the book, and you mentioned something about scooting your furniture away from the walls. And I look, and everything in my apartment is so up against the wall that it's almost in my neighbor's house. Like I was like, man, I need to scoot my couch back. I need to bring my computer desk out a little bit. What am I doing? But that's just more stuff that my cat can get behind. So I don't really think about that. But so again, the book has, I mean, you've really done a nice job with breaking it into, here's how to get started. Here's how to design with it. When you're done with it, here's how to sell it. So I think that's some really good information, especially with people that watch this and want to get into it, or if they just buy it just for the design aspect and then they go back and read the whole thing. So Virginia, kind of let us know what some of the other projects you're currently working on are.
So the book came out in July, and I did a book tour up the East Coast, and I am about to do sort of a second leg of that. So I will be in Charlotte, North Carolina, next week for their home and landscape show. Okay. And then I'm going to do another home show in Jacksonville in March, and another one in Greensboro in March, and another one in Atlanta in March. So I'm excited because those are, those fun shows where people go to like learn about how to renovate or design or whatever. So I think it'll be a fun sort of new audience. And also obviously going to new cities allows me to thrift and go to estate sales in those cities, which is sort of part of the draw for me.
For
So
sure. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, if you ever come to the Midwest, we definitely want to get you up to the office and kind of show you
yes,
around here. So,
absolutely.
well, I'll tell you what, take this opportunity to kind of plug everything you've got and where they can get the book and your website and all that good stuff.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram at @vshamlee, and I have a website, bigthriftenergy.com. You can buy my book on Amazon, obviously, Barnes and Noble, Target, Books A Million, Powell's, Hudson's. It's available in Canada and the UK now as well, and probably your local bookstore. A lot of local bookstores have it as well. You can check bookshop.org to see where it's available locally.
Okay. And Virginia, this is first time that she's heard this, but we might work on a signed copy giveaway at some point
I'd love to do
before
that.
this comes out. So we'll get in touch about lining that out. So
Yeah, that'd be great.
Again, everybody, this is Virginia Chamlee with Big Thrift Energy. It was such a pleasure to talk to you, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.